Game Time, written by Janisa Handrick. Grandma Dido's Promise. Sunlight streams through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The air is thick with the scent of old spice and a strange quiet. In the background, Grandma Dido in her 50s, her face etched with worry lines and visible traces of bereavement, stands by the door greeting visitors. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Dear," a woman says to Dido, her voice trembling slightly. "Such a tragedy." "Thank you," Grandma Dido replies, her eyes red-rimmed. Another guest, a man with a somber expression, offers his condolences. "They were a wonderful couple," he says. Grandma Dido nods, her eyes welling up. "The best," she whispers, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She glances towards Nia, a determined glint in her eye. "I'll be there for her." At the worn oak table, Nia 9, perched on a stool, picks at a loose thread on her dress. Her eyes are red and puffy, and a tear rolls down her cheek. Her feet, clad in new, bright red shoes with bows, wiggle slightly beneath the table. They throb with a dull ache. The front door creaks open and two figures enter. Tony, 7, his face smudged with chocolate, bounds in first. He clutches a brightly colored balloon. "Hi, Nia," he says, his voice a little too loud. "I brought you a balloon. It's red like your dress." He thrusts the balloon towards her, his brow furrowed when she doesn't smile. Near behind is Zane 9, his usually mischievous grin replaced with a solemn frown. He carries a small, wilted sunflower. "We're sorry for your loss, Nia," Zane says, barely a whisper. He carefully places the sunflower in a vase already overflowing with droopy flowers. Nia manages a sniffle and looks down at the table. "Thank you," she whispers. Tony sits on the stool next to her, the balloon bobbing excitedly. "My mom makes the best cookies," he says, trying to cheer her up. "Maybe we can bake some later?" Zane sits across from them, his gaze fixed on the floor. He kicks at a loose floorboard with the toe of his shoe. He notices Nia's feet wiggling and winces slightly. Suddenly, the door bursts again, and Esme, a freckled girl with bright pink pigtails, storms into the room. "Give me that!" she yells, snatching the balloon from Tony's hand. Tony gasps, his mouth falling open in surprise. Esme glares at Nia. "It's mine now," she declares, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "My daddy said I could have any balloon I wanted." Zane exchanges a bewildered look with Tony. Nia, however, surprises them all. She looks at Esme, her chin lifting slightly. "You can have it," she says, her voice small but firm. "Red's too much for today." She winces slightly, the ache in her feet intensifying. "Besides," she adds, "these shoes are already giving me a headache." Zane, watching Nia's feet, says gently, "Maybe you should take them off." "Nia, I think they're making your feet hurt." Nia looks down at her shoes, then back at Zane. He's right. Slowly, she slides her feet out of the red shoes and places them on the floor. The sudden release of pressure feels terrific. Esme stares at her momentarily, taken aback by Nia's unexpected response. Then a slow smile spreads across her face. "Okay," she says, a little sheepishly. "Thank you." She hands the balloon back to Tony. "Here," she says, "you can keep it." Tony, still a bit bewildered, takes the balloon back. He looks at Nia, his eyes wide with admiration. Watching the exchange with surprise and amusement, Zane finally smiles. Grandma Dido, watching the interaction from across the room, smiles softly. "I'll make sure she's okay," she vows to herself. "I'll be her strength." 12 years later, the flickering neon sign of the Salty Siren cast an eerie glow on the rain-slicked street around 9 p.m. Inside, the air smelled of stale beer and regret. This was not how Maya had envisioned her first date with Ronan. "So, you liked sports?" Ronan stammered, his face flushed. He gestured vaguely towards the television screen above the bar, where a gruesome wrestling match unfolded. Maya politely declined, her gaze fixed on the puddle beneath her feet. "It's not my thing," she admitted. "I prefer books." A long silence followed. Ronan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting around the room. "Books, huh? What kind of books?" "Oh, the usual," Maya said, forcing a smile. "Fantasy, sci-fi, love romance, the occasional thriller with intrigue." "Thrillers, huh?" Ronan leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a newfound interest. "I know a good thriller. It's called The Game Time for the Air." Maya blinked. "That's not a thriller. It's suspenseful," Ronan insisted. You never know what's going to happen next. The conversation continued to flounder, and each attempt at small talk was met with awkward silence or misplaced enthusiasm. By the time the bill arrived, Maya was ready to escape. "I think I should probably get going," she said, fumbling for her purse. "Yeah, me too," Ronan agreed, visibly relieved. As they stepped out onto the rain-soaked street, a sudden gust of wind sent Ronan tumbling backwards. He landed with a sickening thud on the wet pavement, his head hitting the curb with a sickening crack. Maya gasped, rushing to his side. "Ronan, are you okay?" Ronan groaned, clutching his head. "I think I might have a concussion." Maya panicked. "Oh my God. What do I do?" Luckily, a kind passerby offered to help. They called an ambulance and stayed with Maya until it arrived. As she watched the paramedics load Ronan into the ambulance, Maya couldn't help but think that this date had taken a turn for the genuinely disastrous. The next day, she received a bouquet from Ronan. Card attached read, "I'm so sorry about last night. I promise I'm not usually this clumsy. Would you maybe like to try again? This time, I'll pick the restaurant." Maya smiled. Despite its dramatic ending, this first date mightn't be the last. After all, it certainly wouldn't be easy to forget. The rain had stopped, but the air in the alleyway was still thick with the scent of damp concrete and something faintly metallic. "Zane," a gruff voice rasped, "you're late." Zane, a man whose suit was more comfortable with shadows than sunlight, adjusted his fedora. "Apologies, Tony. Traffic was a nightmare." Tony, a mountain of a man with a face like a Greek god, snorted. "Traffic? In this neck of the woods? More like you got sidetracked by some dame with killer curves." Zane chuckled. "A man's gotta have his distractions, Tony. Besides, this meeting is about something delicate." "Delicate?" Tony scoffed. "You mean that dame with the sore feet?" Zane nodded. "Nia, she's causing a ruckus. Seems she's decided to dabble in charity work." Tony frowned. "Charity? Nia Sore Feet Sorelli? The woman who'd skin a flea for a nickel?" "Exactly," Zane confirmed. "But this charity is different. She's building a soup kitchen for people with low incomes. The homeless." Tony let out a low whistle. "The woman who once tried to extort protection. Money from a hot dog vendor is now feeding the hungry? This is more interesting than I thought." Zane leaned closer. "There's more. She's attracting attention. Good attention. The newspapers are singing her praises. The mayor is even considering giving her a key to the city." Tony slammed his fist on a nearby dumpster, rattling the cans inside. "This can't stand. Nia Sorelli a saint? It's an insult to organized crime." Zane smiled. "Precisely. We need to find a way to discourage her philanthropy." Tony grinned, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Leave it to me. I'll handle this. But first," he paused, "I need a drink. This rain has dampened my mood." Zane nodded in agreement. That was a wise choice. "But remember, Tony," he added with a sly grin, "sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones you don't see coming." A stray cat darted across their path as they walked towards the nearest bar. Tony, startled, jumped back. "Damn feline," he muttered. "Always lurking in the shadows." Zane chuckled. "Just like us, Tony, just like us." The rain lashed against the windows of Nia Sorelli's penthouse apartment, mirroring the storm brewing within her. Years had passed since the incident with the hot dog vendor. Years of carefully cultivating an image of philanthropy, of becoming a beacon of hope in the city. And now these two thugs, sent by those shadows from her past, threatened to tear it all down. They stood before her, imposing figures against the backdrop of her elegant living room. Tony, his face a mask of menace, loomed over her. Zane, his eyes narrowed, observed her with a predatory gleam. "Mrs. Sorelli?" Tony growled, his voice low and rumbling. "We understand you have a fondness for charity." Sitting regally on a silk sofa, Nia met his gaze with an unwavering stare. "And?" Tony chuckled, a humorless sound. "And we believe it would be unwise for your philanthropic endeavors to continue." Nia raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I would comply?" Zane stepped forward, his voice a silken whisper. "Let's just say, persuasion can take many forms. There's a little accident here, a misunderstanding there, perhaps a fire at your beloved soup kitchen." Nia remained calm, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger within her. "You underestimate me, gentlemen. I've built this empire on more than just charity. I have connections, influence." Tony scoffed. "Connections? Influence? Those things can be fragile." especially when they're built on a foundation of, let's say, less than legal activities. He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the air. Nia felt a surge of fury, a familiar anger rising within her. But she suppressed it, replacing it with a cool, calculating gaze. "You know," she said, her voice deceptively soft, "I've always believed in finding peaceful resolutions." She paused, her eyes flickering to Zane. "But I also believe in self-defense." She gestured towards a discreet alarm button hidden beneath a crystal ashtray. "And I assure you, Mr. Tony, that button is connected to a very persuasive argument." Tony and Zane exchanged a wary glance. Nia Sorelli, the woman who once walked the streets with a limp and a scowl, had evolved. She was no longer the vulnerable girl they had once underestimated. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had learned to wield subtle and overt power. As the two men exchanged uneasy glances, Nia knew this was far from over. The battle lines had been drawn, and she was prepared to fight. The sore-feet Nia Sorelli was no more. In her place stood a woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and ready to defend her hard-won victories. The tension in the room was palpable. Tony and Zane, two heartthrobs, found themselves inexplicably drawn to the woman they had come to intimidate. Nia unexpectedly affected them with her unwavering gaze and steely resolve. Zane, the more cautious of the two who sometimes help out at the soup kitchen, was strangely captivated by her calm demeanor. He had expected fear, perhaps even tears. Instead, he encountered a woman who met his gaze with an unwavering confidence that intrigued and intimidated him. Tony, the more impulsive of the two, a lawyer whom was initially dismissive, but as Nia spoke, her voice low and measured, a grudging respect began to simmer within him. He admired her courage, her defiance. He had underestimated her and found himself strangely intrigued by this unexpected turn of events. The meeting ended abruptly, with a tense silence hanging in the air. As they left the apartment, Zane couldn't shake off the image of Nia, her eyes blazing with defiance. Tony, meanwhile, found himself brooding over her words, her unexpected strength leaving an indelible mark on him. Days turned into weeks. Tony and Zane, despite their best efforts, couldn't seem to forget the enigmatic Nia Sorelli. They found themselves drawn back to her world, observing her from afar, admiring her philanthropic endeavors. Then came the unexpected twist. Nia's grandmother, a formidable woman with a sharp wit and a penchant for mischief, had a long-standing rivalry with Tony's grandfather. Their rivalry had escalated into a series of playful bets, the most recent of which involved a heated chess game.